Welcome. You are at the CCC.
Where there are no outside issues. My name's Anthony. I'm an addict and an alcoholic, another bozo on the bus, and I care about you.
Yes, and I'm LouiLou. My pronouns are he and him, and I am in recovery for crystal meth and alcohol. Yeah, I'm sorry. Oops. He normally says, and I am always in search of balance.
Oh, yeah.
I forgot that part. Yeah. And each week, we strive to create a brave space where we can engage in conversations around topics of recovery.
And our intention is to hold and inspire better spaces for more people in recovery by tackling issues sometimes used to separate us.
Yes, but before we do that, please like, share, comment, and rate this episode.
Rate this episode.
Rate it. Ding that bell, or whatever you do.
And now the disclaimer. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed on At the CCC are ours alone. We do not represent anyone but ourselves. The material and information shared here is for general information purposes only. In other words, we are just a couple of friends behind a mic here to entertain you.
Right on. I am so sorry. It's like, I was so worried about that other line. I forgot the rest of my
it's okay.
intro, but that's okay.
And maybe you're starstruck because we are sitting next to the one, the only Pollo Del Mar.
You'd better be starstruck.
So yeah, the person sitting between us needs no introduction.
Well,
we will do an introduction. Pollo Del Mar is very many things. So Pollo, or Paul. Can I call you Paul?
Yeah,
Okay, so Paul, I am preparing for today. I was researching all the things that are about you. Your Wikipedia page is pages long.
Yeah.
It is pages long. I learned that, at least it's documented that you started drag in 2006. So you've been doing drag for about 18 years. One of the common denominators I found throughout all of your career is that you've done a lot of fundraising work, and that's been drawn from when you work with the Imperial Council, which I think you were the 53rd or 56th?
53rd.
And also the Ducal Council.
And the Ducal
Council. I started, my fundraising efforts in drag, actually, that's how I started drag. That's what started me doing that, was fundraising for conferences that I attended, and the fellowship of sobriety. That's what I started out doing. And as a result, okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And as a result, I continued that throughout my actual career in drag. So I reigned as the 37th Grand Duchess of San Francisco underneath the San Francisco Ducal Council, the 53rd Empress of San Francisco, and tons of fundraising.
And let's not forget that drag is not the only thing that you've done. You've also been a journalist. Your pro wrestling career has really taken off in the last few years. You've been invited to host many events. I think the one that I saw recently was the Big Gay Brunch or something like this in Florida. So, I could go on and on. You've released singles, you've acted, what haven't you done? You've literally
and comedy too.
And you've done stand-up, you've done...
As soon as we single out something that I haven't done, I will do it.
Yeah.
As soon as I realize there's something I haven't done, I will do it.
Yeah, you've shared stages with people and spaces with people like Lady Gaga, Katy Perry. I think you did an opening thing. So it goes on and on and on.
You interviewed a lot of
celebrities.
Yeah, so I've worked with So one of the things that I've done with my drag is I've actually turned it into sort of an all-encompassing brand for myself. It's many things to many people and to myself actually. So when I started doing drag, I was actually working as a journalist, and I was still fairly early in sobriety at the time. And I realized that as soon as I wrote something underneath the name Pollo Del Mar, suddenly people came up to me and were like, "Oh my God, I loved it! I read your article. It was amazing." And when I wrote under my own name, nobody cared and nobody commented, and I was, an attention-seeking whore. So it was something that was quite necessary for me to get that kind of accolade, and so I started lumping that under the Pollo Del Mar too, and it just. As I said, it became a brand. It was many things to many people, and I have used the platform that drag has given me to do most of the things I've ever dreamed of doing.
Yeah, and I think there was one other thing that I wanted to make sure that we circled around was that you've also been politically active, and you received a lot of attention for your stuff on your work on Prop 8.
Yes, and that was completely unintentional on my part. I didn't set out to do that. One of the things that happened is I was one of tens of thousands of people who went out in the wake of Prop 8 passing, which prohibited same-sex marriage, or whatever they call it, gay marriage, but same-sex marriage. And it was just a situation where I happened to be in drag at that event because I felt that's how I was best known. That's how I represented our community. And somebody thrust a bullhorn in my hand. And so
Is that when we marched around the city?
It is.
Yeah, I remember following. I was complaining about wearing these little heels, and she's like, "Shut up."
Yeah, she was in like kitten heels, and I was in 8-inch platform boots. So it was a lot different. But what that proved to me was that, I did not set out to do that. And there's a saying that I love, and it's that God does not call the qualified, he qualifies the called.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yes.
And so I felt like I was called upon, and I did not feel that I was qualified for that role. And many people, in fact, in the community told me I was not qualified to be in that role. But fortunately, drag had given me a voice at that juncture that the community responded to. And I felt that it was necessary at that time and in that place to utilize it for that purpose.
And you know what's amazing about this conversation? And we're just at the introduction.
Yeah, exactly.
Literally just at the introduction. So this makes me very excited to have this conversation in particular, because I love the kind of, and I know we have to do this broad stroke with your career, but really what I'm really excited to learn more about is like, how did Pollo Del Mar become Pollo Del Mar? And what has that been like in recovery? And so one of the things you just said is like, you created this brand and that no one wanted to listen to Paul, but they wanted to listen to Pollo. Can you say more about that?
Yeah, I think that what the distinction is, I don't think that it's necessarily a matter of people won't listen to me or that I was invisible to people. But I think that when you put a voice with a recognizable face, it's that's something that's completely different. If I were to walk through a crowd of people, especially, and remember, much of this is before the height of social media, and people did not know what I looked like under makeup. They would, they identified with me from seeing me in nightclub environments or performance spaces, from seeing me in the newspapers or magazines, things like that. And of course, those were always when I was done up.
You're not so physically big as Paul, but as Pollo.
Yeah, I'm very imposing as her. And so I could walk through public spaces back then, especially since I went out of my way to separate the two entities. I would not ever post anything to my Pollo Del Mar social media at that time, whatever it might have been, MySpace, I don't know.
Friendster.
I was never on that. And, but I was on MySpace. And so I never posted anything there that would identify me outside of this. And when it came time to kind of speak up or be a voice for the community, it was almost a requisite to do it as the person that the community recognized me to be. Whether I wanted to manifest that all the time or not, that was what the community expected of me. And I was so inclined to indulge it.
Oh my God, this is, what's cool about this conversation? And one of the reasons why you were the first person that I thought of when we thought about like using your drag to work for you, all the questions we had throughout the month, you're kind of answering them, because these are challenges I think that all drag queens go through, making sure, like we talked in depth about, like separating the two and the importance of that, because it's like, especially if you come in and you're not as secure, your self-esteem's not so high, you confuse like all the accolades and the attention that other persona may be getting. And I had a friend who was like really kind of distraught because they were upset. Everybody was really paying attention to that persona, and he felt left out. And I'm like thinking, bitch, that's you.
Yeah, I think that is something, actually, interestingly enough, that's an issue that my mom has had with my career, because my mom has always she's always, thought that I was talented and skilled and that there were great opportunities for me to achieve. And I was doing all of those things, but none of them were coming under my name, my actual name. And she had such an issue with that because she felt that the person that I really am was lost behind a person I became. And ultimately I had to say, Mom, this character wouldn't exist without me. This character only exists because of me. But what you were talking to specifically in early recovery, I think that I very much, I started drag at 2 years away from my active using. And I really do, and it's probably something that's overstated by many people, but I feel like drag actually saved my sobriety, because I was 2 years clean and sober, and I had reached a point where I was so incredibly bored. I did not know what to do, and all of the things and the identity and the person that I had been before had been wiped clean by sobriety. And in many ways, I'm very grateful for that. But at the same time, if I had not discovered something new to challenge me at that juncture, I think it could have been easily swayed for me to veer off and find trouble, because I had been so accustomed to that high drama, high trouble, constantly like my pants on fire situation, that without that kind of excitement, life that was serene and calm and predictable was very boring for me.
I love that you're mentioning your mom, because one of the questions that we ask everyone is like, to put all of this in context, is one of the first questions we generally ask guests is like, where are you from? So can you tell us a little bit about that?
So I was born in Ohio. I lived there only until I was 6. And then we moved to the greater Houston metro area, and we moved around quite often. My family moved with such regularity that as a child, I didn't understand it. And as an adult in sobriety, I had the opportunity to look at it with some perspective and recognize that my father, who passed away as a result of alcoholism, was that had the same kind of troubles in his 20s and 30s that I did in my 20s and 30s. And that's tremendous instability, inability to keep a job for any period of time, burning bridges, damaging relationships, and running from the problems that I'd created. And he did the same thing. The difference between us was that he had a family of 4 that was being dragged behind him. So I went to multiple schools each school year quite often. I mean, I went to 3 different schools during the course of 5th grade alone. So we moved very often. And then when I was about to enter high school, we moved to Florida. So I graduated high school from the same place. I was there for 4 years. I managed to do that for 4 years in Florida. Then I went back to college in Cleveland and came to San Francisco shortly thereafter.
So our next question, the next question, are you ready?
Yes.
What brought you to recovery? I mean, other than some of the challenges you had selling me bad product. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah. So when I first met LouiLou, or whatever her name is on this production, LouiLou, when I first met him, he lived in Sacramento. So everybody was like, Louis from Sacramento. Like, I'd be like, have you seen Louis? And they'd be like, who? Louis who? I'd be like, Louis from Sacramento. So, you know, that's how I'm so glad that you managed to get out of your hometown of Sacramento and get to
How many
San
times are you going to
Francisco.
say that I'm not from Sacramento?
So
my listeners, they already know that I'm not.
of course, Louis from Sacramento and I have gone back a long time, very, very long time, especially since I got sober in 2004, and I knew Louis from Sacramento in like 2001, I think. Yeah. So what brought me to sobriety was, the grand scheme of it, like the thumbnail picture of it, is that anything that had ever meant anything to me in my life, whether that was academic achievement, corporate achievement, stability emotionally, mentally, spiritually, romantic relationships, family relationships, anything that had ever had any value to me prior to 2004, I had found a way to smoke it. So that was what got me here, is I'd smoked away everything. And if you think that you cannot smoke a 1997 Jeep Wrangler, you are so wrong. I smoked that one away. So, you know, that's what got me here. And it was really I think the moment that most encapsulated the way I felt is I'd been in a relationship for the last couple of years of my using, and it was very contentious at all times and on every level. But he was somebody who, though he participated in many different kinds of extracurricular activities, he didn't like the ones that I did. And one morning he woke up and I was out of bed already far too early, and I was already back at it, back at doing the things I did every day. And I looked at him, and the look of absolute horror and disgust and pity he had in his face truly reflected the way I looked and saw myself when I looked in the mirror. And that for me was a bit of a breaking point. And that's not exactly when I got sober, but it was about 2 months beforehand, six weeks to 2 months beforehand. And that is really what those last days were like for me. And it was the absolute epitome of pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization.
Thanks for that. So what we're doing right now is we're sneaking in these 3 questions that we ask all of our guests, but we came in running. So the last one is, what's your relationship with your higher power?
So I have an evolving relationship with the higher power. And what I mean by that is that initially first I want to point out or put out there into the world, I have had no kind of negative experiences with organized religion. I have nothing against any of that. I had a very limited interaction with it, to be honest, before coming into the realm of sobriety. So I didn't reject those ideas, but I will say that I rejected some of the concepts that other people seem to want to portray those entities as. So that for me, that was a bit of a pushback. It's like, the idea of, for example, a God doesn't bother me. An idea of certain people's God horrifies me.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. But my higher power has largely always been initially the group, the principles of this program, the concept of sobriety itself. So that was something very easy for me to participate in early on. So for me to have conscious contact with a power greater than myself, that meant I had to go to meetings. Prayer is the act of talking to a power greater than myself. So I could raise my hand at a meeting and talk about that and share with my fellows what's going on with me. And meditation is the act of listening for a response from that power. So I could, once I'd shared what was going on in my life, I could listen to the shared experiences of other people and perhaps glean something that could be really helpful in my own growth, or was very on point with what was going on in my personal life. So that was the initial element of it. But since then, it has certainly evolved. And I would like to say that I have a casual and very friendly, very comfortable relationship with an ethereal type of higher power. And if it sounds odd to hear, I've never tried to understand it. I don't need to understand it. It's my firm belief that if I was able to understand it truly and fully, it would not be large enough to deal with the problems or issues that I needed to. And secondarily, I think of my relationship with a higher power quite a bit like texting or emailing, and I don't know how either of those work, but they do. Exactly. I can send a message to somebody, and I can send a text message and just hit send, and Louis from Sacramento gets it, and I don't know how. I don't know how it got there, and if Louis from Sacramento chooses to respond, that's fine. It's going to be on Louis from Sacramento's time.
I don't know where Louis from Sacramento is, but I appreciate that.
I want that. We're probably going to change your name officially.
I know
Louis
exactly.
from Sacramento.
I need a T-shirt.
Louis from Sacramento.
Paul, could you go back to? I really appreciated something you said a little bit ago about that. It was like the quote. I think was something like God does the qualified. What was it? God doesn't.
Yeah. God doesn't call the qualified. The qualified or the. Yeah.
All right. Let's start over.
God doesn't call the qualified.
He qualifies the one who's called.
Yes.
Yeah.
God doesn't call the qualified. The called. He qualifies the ones who are called.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes. Sorry, it was a tongue twister. I know what the fuck I'm saying.
Exactly.
You and God know.
Exactly. It's between us.
Yeah.
I mean, of the messages that we've gotten, that's pretty solid. Like if you're listening right now, it's not that like. It's a matter of being there and being willing.
Exactly.
Having the willingness.
Exactly. And I think that for many people who are, whether depending on, it doesn't even matter how long you might have been in sobriety or considering sobriety. For many people, I believe the idea is that, I can't do that. Like, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm not the one to do that. And one of the things that I've come to believe is that when I find myself in a situation where I'm saying, you know what, somebody should do ... If I am available, if I'm capable, and I'm the one who noticed that there is a need, then perhaps the one who should is me.
Yeah.
Why should I wait for somebody else to do it for me? I can do it myself. Somebody should pick this, pick this room up, straighten this room up or clean up all this trash. Well, you're the one who complaining about it, and you seem to be available to do it. So do it.
That's always impressed me about you because, like, even though I knew you from before coming in, like, somehow I place people on these pedestals and I looked at you in a certain way, like in your celebrity status or whatever. And then when you sign up to do these things or whatever, that's inspired me to kind of show up, to kind of say, yeah, well, I guess if Pollo can do it, if Paul can do it, I can do it.
It's something that I think that is, and I'm not saying this about myself, but I've been educated enough to learn that that's a sign of good leadership when I'm placed in situations of leadership, or I've been, whether assigned or kind of grown into them, I will never ask somebody else to do something that I would not do for myself. Absolutely. And more often, I will never ask somebody else to do something I'm either not already doing or haven't already done. Mm-hmm. So that is something that has really come in very handy for me in the corporate world, the going into the world of wrestling. People, I get brought in places. They fly me in to do what I do, and they're bringing me in for a very specific skill set and kind of performance during an event. But I hope that I never act like I'm any better or different than anybody else. We're all there. If chairs need to be set up, and if the place needs to be swept afterwards, or something needs to be carried out, or whatever the case is, errands need run, I will do it.
One of the things that I've always appreciated about you since I've known you is that there's always been a very sincere depth to you. I feel like I've been very fortunate to experience a more kind of sensitive or softer side of Paul, which I think a lot of people who
don't get to see.
A lot of people don't get to see, a lot of people see.
Yeah, you have under 10 years, don't you?
Yeah. So there's enough time. So I'm bringing that up because when there's almost this kind of, one of the things I'm hearing here is that it almost sounds like the life that has become the life that you have now in recovery started because there was a moment where you were bored.
Yeah, absolutely. And I continue to find moments in recovery because I'm bored, or because something has become too simple for me. And I continue to challenge myself. I continue to grow. I think that is something that being sober has taught me, is that if I'm not growing and moving forward, then, the inertia will only take me so far. And then you start to drift backwards.
Could you go ahead?
No.
Well, what I want to know is not everyone is capable or knows to listen to whatever it is that you're listening to. So if you're bored, there's something inside of you that you're responding to.
Yeah,
right?
because that boredom unfortunately takes some people out.
Many people.
Yeah.
Right. So can you say more about that? What is it that you're listening to, and how do you know to what the next step is?
Well, at the most base, what I'm listening to is when I feel like I'm not being challenged by what I'm doing. When something is no longer challenging to me after a very short period of time, I become disinterested in it. And I don't want to allow myself to become disinterested in things that I love. Usually I'm doing something excessively because I love it. And if I kind of wear it out, then I become bored with it. And I will become discontent and ungrateful about what is brought to me, and I don't want to allow for that. So what I continue to do is find new and different ways to apply my skill sets and do different things and go forward into different areas of my life. And again, it's one of the things where I said, my drag is many things to many people, because if I were to, poll maybe 100 people who are familiar with the things that I do, each one of them would come up with something different, which is what appealed to them about my persona and the work that I've done as that.
One of the things I'm noticing while sitting here, asking you questions, is at least what I'm picking up on is that there's this force or power you have to your presence. And I wonder, is it hard for you to have a personal life, just given everything that it is that you do? You travel a lot, you have all this notoriety, people know who you are. So I wonder, when do you get to have just Paul time, and are you able to cultivate more intimate relationships?
I mean, I certainly have more intimate relationships. I don't know that there is a time like a Paul time. I don't know that exists for me. And the reason I say that is because people will ask quite often, like, what do you do for fun? And I list off a litany of things that I do thinking it's fun, but it's actually work. And that's because I'm so blessed and fortunate to love what I do, that is fun. And for me, that is recreation. But I certainly have, there's definitely a force to my personality. It's a large personality, and you have to be a certain kind of person to be able to deal with it to begin with, and then even more specific kind of person to be able to not let it completely overpower or overshadow you. So there's that. But I certainly am surrounded by people who I think have equally huge personalities, and it's like a game of ego pinball at times, where we're just all sort of like bouncing off of each other.
Are any of them from Sacramento?
Yes. Only one. Only one is from Sacramento, and she has a very large personality.
But there's so we're joking about that, but there's a blessing in finding other people with these strong personalities, because the last thing I want to do is dim my light for someone else.
I refuse.
It's like, I used to think that I needed to do that, but the reality of it is I'm not serving you or anyone else. I'm giving you an opportunity by showing up as my true authentic self, or as authentic as I can be. Then it inspires folks. It's like, I hear from my sponsees all the time. It's like, we talk about it. I'm not trying to force anybody out of the show, but I'm trying to encourage. There's nothing wrong with being loud, being the way that I am. If you can't handle it, I'm sorry for that, but I'm not going to shut down because of that. So, yeah. And I'm not from Sacramento, one more time.
And the interesting thing about that revelation there from Louis from Sacramento is that I say quite often that if my personality shines too brightly for you, you'd better put on a pair of sunglasses, because don't expect me to dim the light.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. It's a you problem, not a me problem. Mm-hmm. And the flip side of being able to encourage people as well to come out of their shells and be more authentic and be more vibrant in ways that quite often people have grown up feeling was inappropriate or not acceptable, and they've shut that down, is that there are people who are genuinely just more quiet and more introverted and more subdued, who love basking in that because they can be themselves in the presence of that. They don't have to carry the conversation. They don't have to carry the social atmosphere.
Absolutely.
And quite frequently, when they are in the presence of somebody who has such a large personality, others will gravitate towards that person, and then they will be able to strike up conversations with them, and it's more comfortable because they're just there sort of, sharing an experience in the presence of whatever multiple kilowatt personality it is.
But something to be mindful with the large personality, you are generous. I think that makes a difference. It's like, I think that when you can have people who just suck the air out of the room, but it's like, and I think that comes from recovery. I really feel like that comes from recovery, because a big part of me is like, I'm doing this, like when I'm doing my drag or whatever, I am at my best when I love the people that I'm doing it for, when I care about them.
Absolutely correct.
Yeah.
One of the things I do want to kind of like flash back on is something that Anthony had said when he was saying that however he was describing my personality in a positive way. I will fully admit that the first many years that I did drag, I don't think that was present. I think it was, for me, I was very, very needy, and I was, because of the fact that, like I said, I felt that when I gave up drugs and drinking and the life that I was living before, I just felt so empty. I did not feel that there was anything interesting about me. I didn't feel that there was anything there. There was no interest from the outside world. That's how I felt. And I did, for the first time in a very, very long time, felt very invisible in early recovery. And then Pollo Del Mar was born on April 27th, 2006. And that turned around entirely. And because I did not have a firm grasp of who I was at that point, I became that other thing. Mm-hmm. It was the Mr. Hyde consuming Dr. Jekyll because I didn't know who Paul was. And so Pollo was something that I could just create and make up as I went along. And And there was a lot of praise and there was a lot of social validation. And there was incredible things that I did not know that I would ever get again because I had gotten sober. And it reached a point where I remember somebody who was very close to me and I were having lunch, and the person said, I just want to let you know, like, I love Paul, but I hate Pollo Del Mar. And I really don't want, because I'd said, why don't we hang out anymore? And he was just like, I just don't like you.
And if you're not separating the two, like
there was no separation.
I see Anthony over there, Fidji, but I wanted to
And
ask,
we also have a comment.
Oh, okay. Let's get the comment, and then I'm
Jaylon writes,
I'm so happy to see my mom on the podcast. I love you so much. You taught me almost everything I know. Also, I'm blessed to have had you watch all the phases of Sayoni, even the best one yet, which is Sayoni as a sober, more elevated, conscious, present performer. Sayoni is amazing. I love you. Thank you, Jaylon.
Can I respond to that too?
Do.
Because one of the things I'll say is, and I take no credit for anybody else's decision making, certainly not their decision to get clean and sober, but I take the concept of practicing these principles in all my affairs pretty seriously. And for many years, one of the things I was best known for is I ran a nightclub, a Sunday night drag show here in San Francisco, very popular. It was very successful. It was well liked, well attended. And I think that it especially was well loved by performers because we had fostered this community of people, and community has been, and probably, I hope, always will be the cornerstone for me of what drag is about. And so many people came through there at different stages of their development, from at different ages, coming out very early on to just coming of age and wilding out in the nightclubs and beginning their drag careers there. And throughout it all, I was able to foster these incredible relationships with so many young performers who, from the day they met me, knew that I did not drink and did not do drugs. What they chose to do with their lives, I don't necessarily wouldn't say I supported it, but it was your life to live. I certainly didn't have, I would have told people off if they told me how to live my life at that age.
Absolutely.
And the one thing that they understood is that they could do what I was doing at that time at a high level and a successful level without drinking and without doing drugs. And I think that for some people, since I've seen some of them pop up in very common places that we attend, that was a seed that might have been planted, that it is possible to do this, and it erodes that sort of plausible deniability where it's like, well, I can only do this if.
Yeah,
it's like,
exactly.
no, that's not true. Not at all.
That's some powerful 12-step work. But going back to you had become this Pollo Del Mar character that you were completely like in this. For me, the mic was the instrument that I used to help separate Minnie from Lewis.
From Sacramento?
From Sacramento. Basically, like
Minnie from Sacramento.
Basically, I
Minnie
said
from
it's like
Sacramento.
Exactly. When you just perform, sometimes you come in 5 minutes, do your number, and leave, and there's no opportunity to kind of flesh out that personality. So for you, what was that turning point? Because you talked about it earlier. What was the turning point? How did you get to the point or start the process of separating out Paul from Pollo Del Mar?
Well, my idea of performance, I have always said that the performance begins the moment I leave the house.
Yeah.
The minute I walk out that door, the performance begins, because I'll be interacting with people on the street, and I'll be interacting with people in the bar, and I'll be interacting with people in the backstage, and then I get to go on stage. How did I begin to distinguish or differentiate between the two? That I think that's a challenge, because I don't remember when that specifically happened. I do remember that I started to feel very burnt out by Pollo Del Mar. I began to feel resentment towards Pollo Del Mar. It's the strangest thing. Like, I resented a character that did not even exist, that was completely of my own making, by the way, that was also paying all my bills. So I was resenting the person who was paying the bills. And
that's understandable.
And it was something that was really challenging. And I think to separate that, I had to figure out who the hell I am outside of that. And a huge part of that came around the time that I had reached 10 years sober. I'd gone through some pretty traumatic things that year. My father had passed away. One of my best friends passed away mere weeks after that. And it was extremely emotionally challenging for me. And I hit an emotional, spiritual bottom at 10 years sober. And when I returned to recovery, not that I'd ever gone out or disappeared, but when I returned to the recovery life that I had initially created for myself, I came back a very different person because I had a different perspective. And what I learned through that was that success and notoriety and popularity and number of followers here or there, the next place, none of that was none of it could save me when I really needed an emotional connection with real people who did not put me on a pedestal, who did not require me to act a certain way. And that's something that I think also contributed, is that the more successful the character became and more well-known it became in our community, that I was handcuffed by that. I could not share, or I did not feel capable of sharing at a group level some of the really difficult things that I was facing, because that character would have been tarnished by my very real human emotions.
Mm-hmm.
I was thinking about when you were talking about not dimming your light, and interesting because I found myself identifying with like the person you were describing. So I have never been a very big personality, and I've always gravitated toward people who were. And one of the things that I've learned, like ever since I was a young kid, is that I've always had these people in my life, and they have always opened up these kind of paths for me. Like either I've found community through like their brilliance, et cetera. So I'm wondering, like what advice do you have for people like me who sometimes feel like we either have to dim our light, or like how does a person cultivate that for themselves?
I mean, I think that if the people who have that bright light, most of them don't want to dim it. Most of like if you recognize that, but there are instances where people have been told through time, they've sort of been like broken down by society or familial situations where they were not allowed to do that. And I don't think that it's something where anybody is going to just show up one day and be like, ta-da, like, I've done it. I think for many people, it comes with comfort and building on small experiences where they feel successful or where they feel freed in that moment, and it just builds up.
Exercise that muscle. Huh?
Absolutely correct. And I think that there's other people, like, my best friend who I met in sobriety and who I can't even remember how we became BFFs, it just happened, is very much an introvert. And even though the thing I think that he loves about our relationship is it's so comfortable that he can be that big personality, but he doesn't have to be that all the time. And he just sort of gets to be the sidekick who's also very funny and very memorable. Mm-hmm. But he loves the idea that, I'm the flower that attracts the bees, and he just gets to sit there and, appreciate the honey, I guess. I don't know.
That sounds about right.
Yeah. It's so interesting because I danced professionally for years, and even then, like,
I always imagine when he talks about dancing and the dance troupe, that it's like 150 person dance troupe and they're popping and locking.
But I
river dance.
I start doing it now. But I was thinking about, like, even in those moments where, like, the second I was done doing whatever it is I was done doing on stage, I like would disappear. Where, like, I never wanted to, like, interact with an audience. I never wanted to, like, hear praise or compliments and stuff like that. I'm wondering, like, it feels to me like even that, like, receiving that level of attention takes a certain level of skill.
I'm sure it does. And, one of the things that I'm sort of gleaning from what you're saying is something that I tell other people quite often. And that is that however you are, unless it's problematic, there's nothing wrong with it.
Yeah, exactly.
There is no need. Like, so many people who are introverts, like, beat themselves up over the fact that they don't like to be around other people. And then they see extroverts doing it and they're like, why can't I, or why don't I want to? Well, there's nothing wrong with you not wanting to. Like, there's nothing wrong. You're perfectly acceptable exactly the way you are. If you better appreciate and feel more comfortable being in a group of 3 than a group of 80, that's perfectly okay.
Own it. Get some acceptance.
Like, get some acceptance around that, and just pick your friends. The other part of it is to remember that for those of us who are fairly extreme extroverts. And by the way, I consider myself an ambivert, which is a term I
know.
I mentioned it last
only
week.
learned during
Yes.
COVID time.
Thank
Louis
you.
from Sacramento was saying that
Yes,
last week too.
last week. Thank you. It's like one other person. I think.
So it's a term that I only learned
Yeah.
is this ambivert, meaning that you can go back and forth. But, those of us who are extreme extroverts, that was something that Louis from Sacramento probably saw of me when we were out doing what we used to do in the clubs, because I would swoop in and I'd be surrounded by people, and I was always like, jumping from group to group to group. But the distinction about that people who I think are introverts don't quite understand is that while I fit into many different groups, sometimes at the end of the day, you're like, I don't fit in anywhere because
Exactly.
I only fit in that
Absolutely.
group for 5 minutes or that group for an hour. And versus the introvert who, though their circle of people around them might be very small, it has been cultivated with great care. And those people are going to be there for like the lifetime.
We have to start landing the plane.
I'm gonna say this. I'm gonna say this for you. So no, to the point about like you have to be a special type of person to receive the accolades and everything. I remember specifically, like after I won Miss Castro Country Club, I remember, and I've told this story before, standing up there and having people take the pictures and everything, and being the most uncomfortable that I've ever been, but realizing that it's because of recovery. And because I signed up for it, and being a person of integrity, that I put on the smile, and I kept doing. So it's kind of work, but I love that I had one other person mention this idea of ambivert, because last week they were like, "Did you make that term up?"
I'm sitting here listening to this story about that Castro Country Club pageant, and I'm just having such a hard time believing it. I can barely believe you. I mean, can you believe she won that pageant? I can't believe she won that pageant.
Wow.
Can't believe she won that pageant.
Well, I love and still love the people who ran against me, but it was clear that I had the right kind of support that year.
Yes.
Shimmy.
I don't. The idea, by the way, the idea of being an ambivert is meaning that you can sort of go in between either one. You can, and I only came to understand that term or even comprehend it during the course of the pandemic, because I was shocked that how much I had grown to love sort of isolation and being by myself, and how little I needed other people to kind of ignite the fire in me.
Absolutely.
I would legitimately spend hours by myself during the pandemic just cracking up because I'm effing hilarious.
Mm-hmm.
I'm so funny. I could barely stand myself.
You are.
And so it was something that was actually challenging once it ended, like so many other people. Like I was not chomping at the bit to get back to doing anything I was. I'm more content, honestly, sitting, doing my TikTok live streams now than I am doing a nightclub performance. I'd rather just sit in my living room and talk to people on the internet and have fun and give them, like a window into what my personality is like on a TikTok stream than go out into the bars and have to deal with all that.
I'm glad you exist.
I'm glad I exist too, because God, what would your lives be like without
It is
me?
so lovely that Stephen is not aggressive like Brandon, because otherwise we
would have been cut off a long time ago.
Off and reading
but we're going to continue recording. So for folks listening, we do our podcast exclusive content. So we're going to land the plane for the visual portion.
Yeah,
of
so
the
we
podcast.
want you to know that the Castro Country Club is a safe and sober community center for all people and a refuge for the LGBTQ recovery community.
We provide programs and services that help people change their lives by supporting personal growth.
And our vision is to reduce the suffering of addiction by connecting people to community, opportunity, and support.
You can find more information, including all the ways to contact us, at www.castrocountryclub.org/podcast.
And tune in every Tuesday at, if Steven's doing it, 4:01 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. We go live on our Castro Country Club Facebook and YouTube channels.
Find us wherever you listen to podcasts. Okay, so we're still recording Paul, that was fantastic.
I know.
Thank you.
I think that it was great that we ended with Paul because
Well, it was by design.
No, it was by design.
Yeah.
Also because we had to get some practice in, like, you know, actually with this interview format, because we hadn't really been interviewing people. But Paul's the powerhouse.
I don't know. I was fine. I didn't need no practice.
No.
I was glad that you interviewed all those other girls because nobody knew them, so you introduced them to people. I mean,
You're vicious.
Well, I always
but
say,
honest.
I always say, like, if you're a San Francisco celebrity, you are not a celebrity, and so that means that if you're well known in the recovery community, you really aren't a celebrity. So,
Paul literally has a national following.
well, that's what I'm saying. But I wasn't talking about him. Don't try to start trouble. I've been really not.
Don't stir up the ish
I
from
know,
Lewis from
exactly.
Sacramento.
Well, it takes a strong kind of person too to let you guys have as much fun as you've been having with that. But you know, I get it. I understand. It's like, you know, have your fun.
One of the other things I will say about the guests that you had arranged previously is that they run the gamut of lengths of clean time and experiences, and I think that it's important to, you know, if people are going to listen to this as a series of interviews, then they will get different perspectives. Like my perspective at nearly 18 years of doing this and nearly 20 years of sobriety is going to be very different than somebody who has been doing it for,
absolutely,
you know, far less time. And if you had interviewed me when I was, I don't know, 2007, 2008, 2009, when things really first popped off for me and were, you know, kind of so incredible and such a whirlwind that I did not know how to cope within it, the person you would have been speaking to would have been incredibly different. You know, my sobriety was so different, much less my relationship with my drag.
Absolutely. We did ask the question a few times. What about Pollo Del Mar feeds Paul?
What about, so I think that the big thing about my persona, which really does feed me, is again, that I remember I have kind of streamlined everything that I love through this persona. So, and this persona has opened so many opportunities for me. You know, I got back into doing professional wrestling, which was, you know, I would have loved to have talked about this on the main podcast, but it wasn't until almost 10 years sober that I remembered that there was a person who existed before the drugs and alcohol, and before the person that was an adult person, and before that adult person, before drugs and alcohol, there had been a child who had dreams. And those are things that it took me 10 years to even remember existed. And those dreams were things that I set about challenging myself, like, well, why didn't you pursue this earlier? Because society or the world said that somebody like me couldn't do that. And then I challenged myself to look at the world as it is now and look at myself as I am now and say, well, who the fuck's going to stop me? Like me, I'm the only one who can stop me. So those were things that,
isn't that overwhelming? So I just want to make sure we don't lose that. Is it overwhelming? Like, cause even I've had that thought too, like I'm the only one stopping me. That sometimes can be like a very overwhelming idea to really take in.
For me, I don't think that it was overwhelming. You know, my mom, I always tell my mom, like, Mom, I'm magic. I'm magic. And what I mean by that is, sometimes I think I mean straight up that I'm just delusional because the thought when I think about doing something is like I joked about it earlier on, like when we find something I haven't done, I'm going to do it. Yeah. And it's because things that other people might look at and think are so daunting or unachievable or whatever, it never occurs to me that I shouldn't be able to do that. Like that's how I started interviewing celebrities. People were like, how did you do that? And I'm like, I don't know. I just started doing it. I just started reaching out.
You kind of have to be a little delusional, huh?
Yeah. I mean, it just started, you know, like I literally was like, it never occurred to me that, you know, so-and-so shouldn't want to speak to me.
Yeah, no, exactly.
And so I started reaching out to them and many of them said, no, I don't want to speak to you. But eventually others said yes. And, you know, enough people that are celebrities say yes, then other celebrities, It's just like anything. Other people are like, you know, word of mouth. It's like, okay, yeah, that person must think it was okay. They did it, so I'll do it.
You know, you're blowing my mind when you talk about like remembering that there was a person who existed before the using, etc. Because that's how I stumbled on. So when I was in 5th grade, for example, I knew I wanted to be a psychologist. I always knew this ever since I was really young. But then when I started drinking and using, I had completely lost sight of all of that. And then when I got sober, I started to become reacquainted with this person that was actually very full and very whole, as you know, I was as a young kid. And that to me, I feel like is something that I'm constantly returning back to. It's like when the noise dies down and the fear has subsided, there's something left, right? And I wonder if, when I think about like the trajectory of your career, I wonder if it's your connection to that is like much more shorter than it was, say, maybe a long time ago when you didn't know.
Well, one of the things that I recognized from sobriety alone is that if I do the work and let go of whatever the outcome is going to be, the work will be done. And it's prepared me if the opportunity then presents itself. And the other thing that I got from sobriety is, why not try? You know, why not try this? And so one of the things that I've done throughout my like sobriety and my drag career specifically is anything that I ever thought about, like that I wanted to do, I'm like, I'm going to do it. You know, like I want to interview all these celebrities and perform with these celebrities. I'm like, I'm going to do it. So I just figure out how to do it. Music, like I've always been obsessed with music, and specifically dance music. And I was like, what's keeping me from doing this? Nothing. I mean, talent is keeping me from doing it. I have no talent.
That didn't stop you.
I have no talent, but it did not stop me. Honey, if you knew the number of people who have hit records who have no talent, then it's astronomical. Yeah. So, you know, I'm never going to have a hit record, but I've got all this music out there. And I will say that anytime somebody, like our friend Anna is always like, when are you putting out new music? I'm like, your biggest fan. I love it so much. And legitimately 90% of the time, if I hear one of the songs that I've recorded, I just cringe. I'm like, oh God. People are like, are you ever going to go on tour performing? I'm like, bitch, I can barely listen to it in the car. I'm not listening to it in front of an audience. Yeah. That said, I just recorded a new country song.
Oh, yeah. I know exactly.
And a new dance single, both of them within like 2 weeks.
Nice.
That's so cool. I think the last song I remember was Embarrassing. How embarrassing.
Yeah, that was the very first one. There's been multiple. The one that there's two, like during the pandemic, again, it's like, what can I do when I'm sitting at home? So I just started writing music, and I was recording all of these songs, like these demos of these songs that once the pandemic lifted, I wanted to record. And then
I think he's heading to Sacramento.
Louis left to go to Sacramento, y'all. Oh my God.
he just literally
Louis
stood up
was like,
and
I gotta
up.
go. He said, girl, the bus is leaving. I gotta get to Sacramento. The audacity. She couldn't even make it through the whole podcast.
I love that he literally just got up and left.
She was like, she ran out of here. But not only did she run out, y'all, it was like those ladies at the office. She took off her pumps and put on a pair of sneakers because she had to run to the train to get to Sacramento. So what I was saying is that like I'd recorded all this stuff on my own, and then I was going to take it to a producer that I'd worked with before, and then my laptop died, and so it just sat. And then I circled back because one of the things that I ask myself multiple times a year usually is, what is it that I wanted to do that I haven't gotten done yet?
Yeah.
And the other thing that I do is I have a vision board right next to my desk. Oh my God, y'all, Louis missed the train. You're back from SAC already? She's back from SAC.
How often do you work on your vision board?
I update my vision board pretty regularly, definitely at the beginning of the year. And one of the things that I did tell somebody that for me works specifically well as a vision board is, you know, I'll say things I want to do. It's listed like things I want to do this year. And then there's a whole bunch of things underneath it. And the great part about it is it's very few of those are deadline oriented. Like if it's not done by October, it's ruined. So if they don't get done by the end of the year, I just roll them over to the next year, because what is important is that I take time on a regular basis during the course of the next coming months as I'm moving towards that to take actionable steps towards it. I had a huge case of imposter syndrome when it came to my wrestling career, because I went from being this massive fan of wrestling to being fairly well known by a significant number of people. That's, I think, what most people know me for now in many ways. But I mean, the drag and the wrestling go hand in hand because that is my character. But people would talk about me in these ways that were so unrealistic to me. And I was like, God, you're not really a wrestler. You're not really like, doing this. And so to negate that voice in my head, which I'm sure that I'm not the only one who has, I started writing down every single day anything that I do to further my wrestling career. I have a little diary that is nothing but like today's date with bullet points, whether I sent off emails or responded to texts or worked on something, to kind of get my next job, my next gig. That all goes in the book. And then every wrestling event I work goes in a separate diary so that at the end of the year, if my voice in my head is saying like, you're not really working in wrestling, I was able to look at a calendar from last year and be like, girl, you worked 50 wrestling events last year.
Yeah.
And that only includes one from the last 2 months of the year, which for wrestlers is like a slow time.
Yeah.
November, December.
When you're given everything that you have going on, and I don't know if it's okay to talk about the possible tour coming up.
Yeah. There's nothing completely finalized for that, but I'm always, there's a possibility of my going to the UK. I reached out. This again, it's something that was on my vision board. I wanted to tour the UK this year. I saw something of all places on LinkedIn, which is the least likely place I would have expected for the drag queen professional wrestler to find something. But I saw it on LinkedIn and I just took the next step. I was like, you know what? They're asking for submissions. So I submitted. I have a beautiful wrestling resume that I keep updated all the time. I update it quarterly. So I sent it off to them and they wrote back in like such glowing terms, like, oh my God, we're very familiar with you. We would love to be able to work something out, but financially it's pretty cost prohibitive. And going to the UK in the summertime is like $1,500, $1,200 to $1,500. But I responded back and I was like, look, we can collectively work to make this happen and figure out how to do that. And today they responded with like a litany of ideas on how that may be possible. So
I love that.
I'm really optimistic that in June I'll get to go make my first trip ever to Europe. I actually toured in Asia and I toured in Mexico, but I've never gone to Europe at all, ever. So it'd be really exciting to do that. And their pro wrestling scene and their drag scenes both are outrageously popular there.
Are you still doing work with Wrestling Illustrated?
Pro Wrestling Illustrated. I'm an award-winning columnist for Pro Wrestling Illustrated.
I love that.
Are you still doing work with them?
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, wow.
The new issue just arrived in my mailbox like last week, and my column is gorgeous.
Of course it is.
They called me devilish and delightful.
That sounds accurate.
So appropriate. Yeah. It's devilish and delightful Pollo Del Mar.
You know what I love about Pollo being here? Like, as large as my personality is, I am timid compared to these two.
To these two?
To these two?
You know what? It's like I said, Anthony talked about earlier about the door being opened. Basically, I tapped into parts of his person that were already there because every week, this one comes with the sass and
I've been so tame today. Paul was here, so I was like, Paul will do all of this for us.
Exactly.
Anthony, you know what I'm hearing from this? This reminds me of like when people go to Los Angeles.
Yeah.
Just because you're the prettiest girl in Sacramento doesn't mean you can stand up next to a Pollo Del Mar.
I don't know where this is going.
Just because you think that you're
You know what's going to happen? I'm going to be on the street and someone say, hey, Louis from Sacramento.
Just because you were like the homecoming queen in Sacramento.
I know. This one here is like, I'm all...
I know we need a bigger soundboard. We need more sounds. You're doing such a great job. We do need a bigger soundboard.
Well, I think we have to land the plane, but
we do have to land the plane the second time.
It's been so amazing because it's like I love it that there's still so much more to talk about.
God,
and I don't even mind being abused.
I'm like a mini-series girl.
I don't even mind being abused for another
You're like
hour.
a docu-series. Have you seen Lover, Stalker, Killer?
No.
It's really good. It's on Netflix.
Remind me of this one.
Lover, Stalker, Killer. Have any of y'all seen it?
No.
Lover, Stalker, Killer. They were together. Okay, he was dating this woman.
Yes.
And then, yeah. Okay.
Yep.
Why are you doing that? 0 time left? Oh, I was told to shut up.
We're out of time.
We're out of time. Paul, thank you so much for coming
Yes,
on.
thank
You're
you.
lovely.
Thank you.
Hopefully we'll have you on again.
Anthony, the dancer, Lewis from Sacramento. I appreciate it.
No, I haven't danced in years. Okay.